To them, a just world is a sane world. There was nothing sane about Chernobyl.
This unbelievable true story is not to be missed. Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 reasons to watch HBO's historical drama, Chernobyl. Before we begin, we publish new content every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. For this list, we're discussing why this HBO miniseries needs to be your next binge watch.
That is how we keep the people from undermining the fruits of their own labor.
Number 10. It's a fascinating true story. Before beginning development on this historical drama, writer-creator Craig Mazin was only vaguely familiar with the Chernobyl disaster. He knew that Chernobyl was a nuclear power plant where an earth-shattering accident occurred in 1986, resulting in the Ukraine city of Pripyat being abandoned.
I was 15.
15,
Yeah,
okay.
I was 15 years old. I remember it. I don't remember it quite as starkly as I remember the incident that occurred about 3 months earlier, which was the Challenger disaster.
Right.
But I definitely remember that it happened. I remember that the entire world seemed concerned. It wasn't simply a local thing.
Beyond the basics, though, Mazin had no idea why Chernobyl exploded, who was involved, and how this catastrophe went from bad to worse. Mazin isn't alone, as a lot of people generally don't know much about Chernobyl outside of the fact that it blew up. Mazin became increasingly intrigued as he did more research into the topic, planting the seeds for a mini-series that's dramatically compelling and educational. For anyone interested in learning about Chernobyl, this is the perfect place to start.
I knew that Chernobyl exploded, but I didn't know why. And it struck me as such an odd lapse, because if you say to people, what happened to the Titanic, they'll tell you it sank. And if you say how, they'll tell you iceberg. Everybody knows it hit an iceberg. Nobody seemed to know offhand why and how Chernobyl blew up.
Number 9. It provides harrowing insight.
Get everyone started on an IV.
We don't have enough.
All the children then.
We don't have enough.
As many as you can.
Given what we know about Chernobyl, you'd think that the citizens of Pripyat would have been evacuated immediately. On the contrary, the managers of the plant and Soviet bureaucrats initially did everything in their power to cover up the disaster.
Was anyone saying what happened? They're running the safety test on the turbines. Blew the control system tank. It doesn't make sense to me either.
At first, they refused to even acknowledge that a disaster had occurred. Nobody thought a nuclear reactor was even capable of exploding, leading the higher-ups to believe that they could sweep this accident under the rug without causing a panic.
The Soviet apparatchik,
Yeah.
the guys who care nothing about anything except their stature, the fear of what's coming from above, and their contempt for the people who are below them.
The public ultimately paid the price for this secrecy, going about their days without knowing they were being exposed to radiation. This miniseries provides jaw-dropping insight into how these colossal mistakes were made and why so many fail to recognize a clear and present danger.
Brikhanov reports that the reactor core is intact. And as for the radiation...
Yes, 3.6 Rontgen, which, by the way, is not the equivalent of one chest X-ray, but rather 400 chest X-rays.
Number 8. It's disturbingly relevant.
There's a spike in zirconium-95. That's from the cladding on the fuel rods.
Meaning what?
The meltdown has begun.
The Chernobyl disaster might have happened over 30 years ago, but its effects are felt even to this day. Pripyat remains an uninhabitable ghost city, and survivors still live with the side effects brought on by radiation fallout. Not to mention the similar incident that happened in Fukushima, Japan earlier this decade. What's more, the incident at Chernobyl mirrors humanity's effect on the Earth today. Climate change and global warming remain among the most heavily discussed issues of modern times. While some organizations, such as UN Environmental, have made a call to action, others continue to argue that the environment isn't in trouble. This was especially apparent after the US withdrew from the Paris Agreement in 2017. Like Chernobyl, however, the problems plaguing our planet won't go away simply because we ignore their existence.
The way I like to think of it is, what is the relevance to everyone? We can tell any particular story, but there needs to be some sort of universal relevance, or it just becomes a story in and of itself about the event, which at that point I refer to those things as homework.
Number 7. It addresses serious issues around truth and power.
There has been an accident at Chernobyl, but I've been assured there is no problem.
I'm telling you that there is.
I prefer my opinion to yours.
Even if you took the environment and nuclear power out of the equation, this miniseries would still be quite timely. Mazin stated on the Chernobyl podcast that this story is, quote, more relevant now than it was when he started writing it, which was notably before the 2016 US presidential election.
It's because it is a story about the cost of lies. This is the first line of the whole show, and this is the theme that we are going to continue with as people watch these episodes. When people choose to lie, and when people choose to believe the lie, and when everyone engages in a very kind of passive conspiracy to promote the lie over the truth, we can get away with it for a very long time.
It's no secret that the phrase fake news has been tossed around a fair deal as of late, and certain politicians have been accused of suppressing facts. Through this miniseries, Mazin set out to explore, quote, how we're struggling with the global war on the truth right now. The series has received widespread praise for this approach, with The Atlantic's Sophie Gilbert calling it a, quote, grim disquisition on the toll of devaluing the truth.
What is the cost of lies? It's not that we'll mistake them for the truth. The real danger is that if we hear enough lies, then we no longer recognize the truth at all.
Number 6. It's universally acclaimed. The positive reviews don't end with The Atlantic. Chernobyl has been certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, whereas Metacritic has the show earning high scores from both critics and user reviews. Chernobyl earned even greater user praise on IMDb, where, as of writing, it's become the website's highest-rated show, skyrocketing past the likes of Breaking Bad, Band of Brothers, and both Planet Earth series. Vern Gay from Newsday gave the series an especially enthusiastic review of 4 out of 4 stars, hailing it as, quote, a remarkable testament in its own right to human folly and human courage, and the triumph of truth over lies.
There's a circle of accountability, nothing more.
You know the work we're doing here. You really don't trust us?
Of course I do. But you know the old Russian proverb, trust but verify.
Number 5. It's reminiscent of classic disaster movies.
Comrade Dyatlov! Comrade Dyatlov!
What's just happened?
I don't know.
Disaster movies were all the rage in the 1970s, and Chernobyl calls several of them to mind. The film this miniseries perhaps has the most in common with is 1979's The China Syndrome. This Academy Award-nominated thriller centers on a fictional power plant that's been covering up safety hazards, and the journalists determined to expose the truth.
What have you got? There's been nothing on the wire about an accident at Ventana.
No, I know. We were in the visitors gallery looking at the control room, and there was an accident. I don't know what it was, Mac, but it's very clear that the guys inside were scared to death, and Richard's got it all on film without them knowing it.
The film couldn't have been more relevant, as only 2 weeks after its release, 3 Mile Island endured an actual nuclear accident, the most catastrophic ever recorded until Chernobyl. The China Syndrome and Chernobyl are both cautionary tales that put less emphasis on bombastic action and more on the flaws of humanity, the consequences of concealing the facts, and the ethical dilemmas that stem from man-made disasters.
For Belarusia and the Ukraine, impact means completely uninhabitable for a minimum of 100 years.
Number 4. It pulls no punches.
Stop, stop!
What are you doing?
These are radiation burns. Their clothes are contaminated. Help me!
Chernobyl is based on one of the most infamous tragedies in human history, and the showrunners never sugarcoat anything. There are moments in this miniseries that'll have your stomach churning and your skin crawling if you're even the tiniest bit squeamish. That being said, the miniseries isn't an exploitative exercise in trying to shock the audience. Much of the dread comes less from what we do see and more from what we don't see. There's a scene in the first episode where a group of people observe Chernobyl from afar, blissfully unaware that they're standing face to face with certain death. We don't see what happens to all these onlookers, but just thinking about it is enough to overwhelm us with fear and paranoia. Number 3. It has a stellar cast.
Told you I'd show you Moscow, didn't I?
Yes.
Rather than seeking out household names, Chernobyl is largely comprised of lesser-known character actors. Of course, the show isn't without a few familiar faces. Jared Harris from Mad Men is deeply empathetic as Valery Legasov. an inorganic chemist desperately trying to open the Soviet Union's eyes to the disaster at hand.
Please may I express my concern as calmly and as respectfully as
Professor Legasov.
Boris.
Stellan Skarsgård turns in a multi-layered performance as Boris Sherbina, a politician who initially clashes with Legasov, but comes to realize that this is no time to let his ego get in the way.
Divers, the firefighters, the men in the control room. What does the radiation do to them, precisely?
Emily Watson is particularly strong as Ulana Homiok, a fictional composite character who's always the most level-headed person in the room.
I know that your reactor core is exposed. I know the graphite's on fire, the fuel is melting, and you're dropping sand and boron on it, which you probably thought was smart, but you've made a mistake.
These performers couldn't feel more natural in their respective roles, never failing to capture the gravitas of their situation.
All victories inevitably come at a cost.
Number 2, it's astonishingly directed and crafted. Through the skillful lens of director Johan Renck, Chernobyl makes the audience feel as if they're back in 1986, witnessing the disaster unfold firsthand. The production values are so authentic that the audience is almost convinced that the miniseries was entirely filmed on location. Obviously, that wouldn't have been possible since Chernobyl and Pripyat don't exactly look as they did over 30 years ago. Nevertheless, this series meticulously recreates Pripyat, as well as the misfortune that plagued the city.
I think for me, for Johan Renck, our director, the Sovietness of things and the Soviet specificity of things was half of what is fascinating about this.
The decommissioned Ignalina nuclear power plant was used as a shooting location given its similar appearance to Chernobyl. The artists behind the scenes were resolute when it came to realism, creating the most accurate portrait of Chernobyl possible. Number 1, it's a reason to keep your HBO subscription. According to a Second Measure report, HBO Now saw a significant surge of signups corresponding with the premiere of Game of Thrones Season 8. While that may sound like good news for the network, a Forbes study found that many might cancel their HBO subscriptions after the final Game of Thrones episode. Although we don't have any exact numbers, vast amounts of Twitter users have claimed to have canceled their HBO service, especially after a highly controversial finale. Before you jump ship though, we guarantee that Chernobyl is well worth the $14.99. Thought-provoking, haunting, and staggeringly cinematic, Chernobyl defines the high-quality entertainment HBO has always strived to deliver. Along with Angels in America and John Adams, it's bound to go down as one of HBO's best miniseries and a major television milestone.
That went surprisingly well. You came off like a naive idiot. Naive idiots are not a threat.
Do you agree with our picks? Check out these other great clips from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.